Thank you all for coming this morning. I just wanted to do some brief introduction, at least for younger lawyers, to issues in fintech law. This is the first one. It's an introduction to fintech law. We're looking at what I would call the classic interbank system. That bit to be a bit technical, but I think that it's just a good idea for us to start thinking about what it is that people are doing in the fintech space. So, a little bit about me. I'm an associate in the tech department at Olanuwa Ajayi. The tech department has been going on for about 5 years. I've been there for about 2 years now, but in the last 2 to 3 years, I've been primarily focused on the tech space, primarily financial technology. It's a space that I'm really passionate about, and it's something that I see myself doing at least for the next 20, 30, maybe 40 years. What is fintech? Now, the truth of the matter is, financial technology isn't something new, but there are some new things that are going on, in terms of new non bank players coming into the sector. The early sort of financial technology really was very bank focused. And the more you think about intermediaries, the more that you think about why some of these platforms have been very disruptive because of the growth of telecoms infrastructure. Um, there has been a rapid increase in new technologies that are seeking to be quicker, faster, more efficient, safer, and more reliable. There's this concept of banking without branches, electronic banking, and this is tied also to the concept of electronic money. Most deposits or most money in the economy isn't held in cash. The deposits sitting in bank accounts, and there needs to be a system by which these monies could be spent. And actually, the Bank of International Settlements has recognized that the effectiveness of payment systems it's very important in ensuring that there's liquidity in the market. Because if you have all this money sitting in bank accounts and there's no way to spend it, then there's very little money flowing around in the actual economy. Nigeria isn't left behind in the disruption. We're hearing new players like Flutterwave, Haystack, Intersway, System Specs, all building on financial technology. I won't talk about cryptocurrency in this because I think that's a bigger topic, but keep an eye out. I already have a slide. Really, it's not on cryptocurrency, it's on virtual currencies, and then we go down to centralized versus decentralized, and then we talk about cryptocurrencies as a subtext of that and why they're fascinating because Bitcoin isn't the first virtual currency. So the legacy payment system. And essentially, Bank A would have a relationship with Bank B, and using a secured network such as SWIFT or FedWire in the US, they send instructions. Now, Bank A has an account with Bank B, and Bank B has an account with Bank A. Bank A puts money in Bank B's account with itself, and Bank B performs a reciprocal transaction. Value isn't necessarily transferred on SWIFT. Rather, SWIFT is itself a communication network. Now, where you don't have a reciprocal relationship, you need the role of a corresponding bank. So in this case now, Osofia wants to send money to Zlatan, and it goes to GMB Bank and says, Osofia is in New York, and says, I want to transfer money to Zlatan's account in Savannah Bank. GMB takes money from Osofia's account and puts it in the intermediary bank's account. The intermediary bank here is Barings Bank that has a relationship with both GMB and Savannah Bank. Barings Bank takes the money from GMB's bank's account with itself and credits Savannah Bank's account. Savannah Bank then takes the money from the intermediary bank's account and credits the beneficiary. Same principles of in the play with the electronic funds transactions, the lower level. And by that I mean it has a similar principle in which banks settle with an intermediary, but rather than having an intermediary bank, which is just a purely bank system, typically at least prior to the invention of electronic fund transfer, with the early forms like checks, what there would be were clearing houses in which all checks would be settled and would be cleared, and value will be moved. This sort of principles of having one entity in the middle of all these transacting parties is how most electronic fund transfer systems, or what I would call interbank systems, function. And the idea is all the banks or banks with clearing capacity are connected to, and all the transactions are routed through names so that there's a record of the transactions on which at the end of the day the net positions of each banks are settled against each other. Now, what this means is it creates a two-tier form of transactions whereby there's the payment confirmation to you as a recipient and the actual moving of value. And the switches in electronic fund transfers are the vehicle with which information is sent from one party to the other. And a few years ago it took up to 5 days sometimes to clear a check, but now you can get instant value moving from one party to the other within minutes, and that's one of the innovations. Now, we've talking about value and we've been talking about the interbank system, but the disruption in fintech is that why does it have to be a bank? If you have electronic value, why does have to be held in the bank? Why can't I hold it in myself? Is a question. That's one of the questions that cryptocurrency is seeking to answer. Because you have to remember that at each level of this transaction and in the previous transaction, fees are being deducted, money is being taken, charges are being made, and it's just to transfer value from one party to the other. Why can't electronic money be more like real money? Why can't it be more like cash? Why can't I give it to you? The hot button topics. Now, although this is a relatively old technology, because of the added complexity, I've left it as the third type, of example of electronic transaction. And the card scheme, what happens is, once again, it's an interbank system. For you to be able to issue a card, generally, you have to be a bank. And the idea behind it is that we've talked also much about value, that card systems were invented at the time whereby if you wanted to pay a merchant, your only choices were either for you to use a check, or you withdraw the cash from the bank and do develop. The whole idea behind cards whereby they were supposed to be a system whereby you could perform transactions electronically quickly. You could have a mobile way of moving value. And it's from this that the card schemes were created. The Visas, the MasterCards, these are actually networks of banks. And what happens is you take your card and you put it in the switches will communicate to the card scheme, who communicates to your bank, confirming you have money. It puts a lock on your account. It tells the other bank that, hey, this person has money. You receive your payment confirmation. However, as always, settlement with the banks will be settled at a later date. So in the Visa is the card scheme. The card issuer is the bank that gives you a card. Now the person that gives the merchant a POS machine is the acquirer. Nigeria, generally speaking, the acquirer and the card issuer are banks. Although the third-party acquirers are allowed to issue out POS machines. POS terminal itself is developed by someone known as the PTSP, the payment terminal service provider, which is a license you get to create POS terminals. I just want you to get used to some of the technology, because when in later webinars, when we're talking about the CBN licensing regime, this is some of the terminology we'll be using. I just want to go back to where I think most lawyers will be more comfortable with the law. Oh, before I go into this, I need to mention one thing actually. So, for you to get a banking license, it's a huge privilege because it allows you to perform all kinds of transactions. On the flip side, it also means that a lot of trust is put in the banks, and it's very easy, for banks to move large sums of money for corporations or for terrorists or for governments, you know, you know. So As I mentioned, there's a lack of formal legislation in the space. So regulation is the main tool. CBN regulations are very important. Also, NCC regulations, as well as regulations by other agencies like NITDA, TAP, because in performing your functions as a technology lawyer, you have to understand what sort of product your client is providing, where he fits into the ecosystem, and how that would affect regulation. Now, there have been some legislative steps taken, like the Evidence Act that recognizes electronic generated evidence, also Cyber Crimes Act, the few Exchange Transactions Act that's before the houses, I think, is awaiting assent if it's not received assent as well. And so a lot of uncertainty may be clarified very soon. When it isn't clear, it isn't certain. There also needs to be a lot more regulatory certainty. We have a difficulty telling a client you can do this, you can't do this, because a lot of time the regulatory regime is unclear. So the licensing framework, as I mentioned before, is sectoral, is divided into different sectors, and it's not universal. So depending on what particular functionality your app or your product or your payment system or your client is doing, it will determine what sort of license you should get. Sorry. So generally, if you are taking deposits and performing a sort of financial transaction in terms of banking regulation, then you will need a CBN license. Now, I want to talk briefly as to the categories of CBN licensing, not as a whole, but just to give a broad spectrum. If you were doing taking deposits, generally you can either take deposits as an MMO, that's a mobile money operator. If you need to take larger deposits and do more things, you get a microfinance bank license. And then if you need to do much more complicated things in terms of taking deposits and forex and some other activities, you may think of getting a much more getting a commercial banking license. On the other side, if you want to perform other financial services like lending, at least on the federal level, you may apply for a finance company license, and on the proviso that you're not intending to take deposits, or you're not supposed to, you're not going to provide those sort of typical banking services. You're performing a particular CBN licensed financial service. Beyond this group of people, the technology providers are also licensed. So I mentioned before the switches, the PSSPs. Now the PSSPs come into play payments on web and in-app transactions, and they perform the role of the PTSP as well as the switch, as well as because they are the ones communicating with the card schemes, as well as creating the terminal. But rather than the terminal is a payment gateway. Um, Also, there's agents, and agent banking, something that we'll talk about in a later slide. But essentially, as part of the financial inclusion aspects of fintech, you need these agents to be able to go deep into the hinterland, to be able to talk to people, to meet directly with their customers, and that's where agent banking comes into play. Now, briefly, if you're going to the capital markets, of course, you know that you need to talk to SEC. Any sort of brokerage is be SEC regulated. Same thing to the insurance sector. There's actually a micro insurance guidelines, which I believe Cassava is one of the first tech companies to take advantage of it. Also, there, as we mentioned before, if you're doing anything with USSD or any telecommunication service, you probably need to have NCC licensing. USSD has become an invaluable part of the payment ecosystem. Ever. Now, money lenders, I mentioned before, if you're doing banking services, you get a money lender's license from the CBN. No, you get a finance company license from CBN. But money lenders are a class of activities that you can get a state license to do, and under the money lenders laws of the various states. And there are a few big players that are using money lenders license. I believe Zvance uses a Lagos State money lenders license. And I know one or two other platforms that will be coming on board using a money lenders license in the interim before applying for the full CBN license. Now, real questions to ask in licensing. If you have an app, for instance, and a license says you can only operate from one location, and you only have one location, but you have an app that's available in several locations, have you broken the licensing framework for that? Is the sorts of questions that you may be faced with when you're thinking of licensing. What if you have a product that, depending on how you look at it, like piggy bank or piggy vest? Is it a bank or is it an investment scheme? It's a sort of, questions I have in my mind, having been in the space for a while, and I look at products to ask what it is you're actually doing. Because the CBN, particularly the CBN, if you're providing a product that is not CBN licensed, they will come for you. So we talked a little bit about financial inclusion, and the whole idea behind financial inclusion is getting more and more people into the financial system, getting more and more people involved, getting more and more people to be part of the system. And there's been financial inclusion strategies, but it hasn't been effective. It's just something that I want people to be aware of, because the sort of things that the regulators have at the back of their mind. It's how well would this product lead to financial inclusion? Do we need? Why is it that all you people are applying for banking licenses in Lagos and no one is taking to go into the hinterland? These are the sorts of issues that arise from a policy perspective and from a legislative perspective. Also, it's important to remember that agent banking is very important because it allows that, for places where isn't a bank branch, for people to still have access to financial services. For example, I've been told that my village does not have a bank branch, and agents are basically intermediaries for banks to provide basic banking services. Give an agent cash so that they can debit it to your bank account. You can print out statements. You can do basic banking activities. Also, what's known as a super agent, which are these large companies that have large networks of 200, 300 agents, and for them to provide financial services. But there's still questions about whether the agent structure is profitable, whether it's actually effective, or whether it's better to solve the fundamental issues of access to financial services that these people are suffering from, such as, do they have electricity, do they have internet service, do they have, computers or mobile phones? KYC is also a big issue that you need to be aware of in the sense of electronic payments and electronic banking, because you need to know that the person at the other end of the computer is who they say they are. They have a record. Obviously, that's where the BVN comes into place. But one good thing is there's a thing as three-tiered KYC requirements in Nigeria, and depending on the sort of accounts you have, the amount of information you have is that need to provide is dramatically reduced. SIM registration is also very effective. There are a few platforms we know that are only using SIMReg as the platform for KYC. Also, national identity number. There's a lot of work that's gone on. The World Bank is currently doing a project, which the idea is to harmonize privacy, and data protection is also an issue. Um, Privacy law in Nigeria is still developing. There was the NICTA guidelines that are, there's a lot of technical aspects to it. So you need to be able to know a little bit about IP law. In Nigeria, most of the IP you'll be faced as a tech lawyer will be copyright, because it's a lot of software, a lot of code. In other countries, you can patent software, or alas, you can't. In Nigeria, the best you can get is copyright. Also, remember that, because Nigeria is signatory to a few international conventions, so if you have prior registration in Nigeria, you usually have a time limit to which you can register these rights in other countries. So there's a new competition law act has been passed. It basically supersedes every other entity's role in ensuring competition. But it's something that you have to bear in mind increasingly as one or two of these entities start to get monopoly power. Obviously, we don't like to talk too much about it, but cyber crimes are a big part of internet and e-money and fintech, and you need to be aware of the reality of cyber crimes. Obviously, there are some laws that have criminalized certain actions. Certainly, the Cyber Crimes Act, but generally, there are concerns that these acts are being abused by political entities to fight other battles as opposed to actually keeping people safe. Now the last mile is you know you've done the design. How do you get your product out there? How do you get the company out there? The things you need to be aware about is tax registration, your signage, permits, AppCon, the whether the advertising company you have is registered with AppCon, also all these local government rates and tenement rates. Depending on where you are, they become to harass you that you should pay all of these things. You need to be aware of it. Good thing that Lagos State has a website that has published all these rates, so you can check for them online. They're uniform around the states. There is an argument that there should be just one body that collects all these rates on behalf of everybody, and you just have to interface with one government entity. So thank you very much. As I said, this was a bit of a ramble because I wanted to try and cover as much as possible in the legal framework for fintech. Um, you can now log on to the Zoom link. It's in the email I sent to everyone else. And obviously, this video will be available to watch on YouTube. So whenever you want to watch it, you can come back to YouTube